along with the plan, and then we will wrap up and go enjoy a nice, cool Shabbos afternoon. This week, I spent a lot of time thinking about the events we read this morning in chapter 32, when the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Menashe asked to stay on the east side of the Jordan. Part of the reason I've been thinking about it so much is because I actually had to get ready to read these events from the Torah, and so I spent a lot more time with the text than I have when I was preparing to just kind of read it off the screen share over Zoom. But also, I really just don't know what to make of their request or of Moses' response. I keep going back and forth. Is their request and their subsequent actions admirable or something we should be condemning? My gut tells me, just from reading the text itself, that it's an audacious request. Just last week, we read of Moses being told by God with finality that he would not enter the promised land, a gut punch of a punishment to Moses after 40 years of leadership. Imagine the chutzpah immediately following that to approach him and say, well, actually, we don't want to go over there anyway. We like this nice grassy patch that we've found. And I think it's also worth noting that one of these tribes is the tribe of Reuben, the overlooked firstborn of Jacob, and a tribe that has had their own struggles with giving up that birthright and joining the rebellion of Korach and never quite being perhaps Moses' favored tribe to start with. Certainly Moses thinks it's a bad idea. Without mentioning any of his own personal sorrow or anguish that he must be feeling in face of this request, he goes on a tirade, comparing these tribes to their sinful fathers and the generation that just died in the wilderness, and that generation that proved to be Moses' own downfall. The commentators, unsurprisingly, tend to view these tribes in a pretty harsh light as well. The most famous midrashic exposition from this chapter says that in speaking to Moses, the representatives of this group revealed more about themselves than they intended to. When they first make their offer to serve as shock troops to lead the conquering Israelite army into the land, the verse reads, they say, Gidrot tzon nivne lemiknenu po ve'arim letapenu. We will build here sheepfolds for our flocks and towns for our children. The rabbis seize upon the order of their words. See, they say, they mention their sheep first, even before their children. These guys are a bunch of misguided capitalists, not worthy to enter the land of Israel in the first place. I think there's a little bit more nuance to be found here. I agree that in listing things in the order that they are important to you, you should probably always mention your kids and your family first. That seems like the right way to set priorities. But I also think that part of worrying about your family is worrying about your livelihood. These tribes see an opportunity, a way of life unfolding before them. In fact, another commentary says that they didn't actually have any more livestock than any other tribes. They just thought about it more. They wanted more livestock than anyone else. And they thought that the grass would literally be greener on the east side of the Jordan. They made what to them seemed like a logical choice and a good business decision. And they did even try to create some logical and emotional arguments to Moses, saying that since God already wiped out the people of the Transjordan, it must in some way be God's land too. Let us stay here. And the question here isn't necessarily just about their priorities. It's about ours as well. How do we react when we think someone else is acting selfishly? How wide are our circles of responsibility and accountability? And in that way, I think the lens through which we can try to evaluate the actions of these 2.5 tribes is one of acharayut, responsibility. There's a great parable about communal responsibility and accountability for one's actions. Imagine 12 people out in a wooden boat. Think one of like the old school ones that they build down at Lowell's Boat Shop that you can see kind of floating down the Merrimack. All of a sudden, one of these 12 people takes out a drill and starts making a large hole right underneath his seat. The other passengers turn to him. "Back off," he says. "I'm only drilling under my seat." And we see the obvious problem there. Drilling under your seat sinks the boat for everyone. Moses' reaction is driven from a place of fear, as he thinks that these tribes have essentially taken a drill to the hull of the Israelites' boat, that this will be spies version 2.0, and once again, everyone will either be begging to go back to Egypt or at least to stay on the east side of the Jordan. Moses, as a leader, sees only one level of responsibility. And as we finish up the book of Numbers, we know where his head is at. Moses has seen conflagration after conflagration, small divisions among the people that jeopardize not only his own leadership, but the very status of the Israelites as the chosen people of God. In Moses' eyes, the only layer of responsibility is the cohesive whole of the nation. And I made a little diagram here. This is the way Moses' circle of responsibility looks. He sees everyone under one, even all-encompassing umbrella. But that's not the only way to see things. These 2.5 tribes see things differently. They know they're part of the larger whole. And remember, as part of recognizing that, they offer to serve as shock troops. That's their idea, to lead the people into conquering the land of Israel. They're ultimately not trying to abdicate responsibility or abandon the nation. They're trying to honor their obligation to all of the different layers at play here. Their families, their tribes, their people, their leader, and their God. Rabbi Rachel Gurovitz writes that we need to ask ourselves how wide our own circle of obligations is. Judaism teaches the need for balance. We are not expected to think exclusively of others. We are obliged, in fact, to pursue our own goals and to marshal enough strength and resources to take care of our own families. And so we see a slightly different diagram from the viewpoint of these 2.5 tribes, right? They are part of the larger whole, but they also know that there's some smaller groups that they're going to feel a more inherent and close obligation and connection with. The Hebrew word for responsibility, acharayut, has roots in the word achar, which means after, and acher, which means other. When making decisions, we need to be mindful of the after effects and the consequences of our choices, and also how they will impact others. I hope that this morning's Parsha actually shows us how to carefully consider our responsibilities, who we are beholden to, and how we weigh those obligations. Remember, eventually the plan of the 2.5 tribes gets approved by Moses, and therefore also by God. And that's because after a little bit of discussion and back and forth, they recognize that the people have managed to strike a delicate balance of acknowledging all of their responsibilities.